Have you ever watched a tech empire burn to ashes over a thumb-sized security token? Forget financial scandals or market crashes. In my world, corporate death comes from arrogant executives wearing cashmere, drinking coconut lattes, and believing artificial intelligence can replace the human lifeline of an entire system. Pour yourself a drink. I am about to tell you how a 3-page handover protocol legally and flawlessly annihilated a $358 million merger. Hello, wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. I want to thank you sincerely for tuning in today, though I must share that YouTube has recently disabled our monetization, leaving us entirely without an operating budget. If you enjoy today's tale, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon channel, where you will find even more incredible, exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's corporate battlefield, starting with a woman named Lillian Howard. My name is Lillian Howard, and I was 38 years old when I orchestrated the most silent and devastating legal trap in tech history. For 5 years, my official title at Aethirus Cloud Solutions was Lead SOC 2 Architect. We were a wildly successful, fast-growing medical data storage company based in the heart of Austin, Texas. In the cybersecurity world, handling medical records is not a joke. You are guarding the most intimate, legally protected secrets of millions of human beings. If that data leaks, federal regulators will wipe your company off the map with astronomical fines. When I first joined Aethirus, their security framework was a total disaster, held together by digital duct tape and blind luck. Over 5 grueling, sleepless years, I tore down that mess and rebuilt it from scratch. I transformed their fragile network into an impenetrable, legally compliant fortress. I was the warden of that fortress, and I took my responsibilities incredibly seriously. Then, the winds changed. The board of directors decided we needed to scale up rapidly to attract bigger investors, so they brought in Carter Vance. Carter was our newly headhunted chief operating officer. Fresh out of the Silicon Valley echo chamber, he was the quintessential modern tech bro, armed with a blindingly white, perfectly manufactured corporate smile. He wore overpriced cashmere sweaters even in the blazing Texas heat, and constantly walked around the office clutching an iced coconut milk latte. Carter worshipped at the altar of artificial intelligence and automation. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who had never actually defended a network against a live cyber attack. More dangerously, he treated corporate downsizing like a competitive recreational sport. To him, seasoned employees were not assets. We were just bloated line items on his financial spreadsheet, waiting to be optimized, disrupted, or outright deleted. The artificial storm finally made landfall on a Tuesday morning during a mandatory company-wide town hall meeting. Carter stood at the front of our massive glass-walled conference room before an audience of exactly 50 employees. He spent the first 20 minutes aggressively throwing around meaningless corporate buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and machine learning. Then, he boldly declared that Aethirus was officially transitioning into what he called a total AI era. He clicked his remote control, projecting a massive, high-definition PowerPoint slide on the wall behind him. The slide featured an aggressive red circle highlighting the operational budget of my compliance department. He paced across the room, proudly announcing to everyone that human compliance officers were far too expensive, prone to fatigue, and completely obsolete. My entire division, he boasted with a sickeningly sweet grin, could be instantly and flawlessly replaced by a shiny new automated monitoring software he had purchased called SentinelBot. Then, he stopped pacing. Carter looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of the kill. Right there, in front of my 50 colleagues, he publicly declared that my position was a relic of the old era. Without a single shred of hesitation or private warning, he officially terminated my employment on the spot. He claimed this public execution was a necessary restructuring effort to optimize our cash flow ahead of a massive, impending corporate event that he refused to name. He said the company required lean, modern efficiency, not outdated human roadblocks holding back progress. The atmosphere in the conference room instantly froze. The silence was so heavy it felt suffocating. 50 pairs of eyes darted frantically between Carter's arrogant posture and my seat. Holding their collective breath, everyone anticipated an explosive, dramatic screaming match. They expected me to throw my coffee across the table, curse him out in front of the executives, or instantly threaten a massive wrongful termination lawsuit. But I did not blink. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. My heart rate did not even spike. I simply offered him a faint, icy smile. I calmly reached out, folded my laptop shut with a soft click, and looked him dead in the eye. I asked him exactly one question. Have you read the hardware encryption key handover protocol? Carter waved his hand dismissively in the air, letting out a loud, condescending scoff that echoed against the glass walls. He looked at me as if I had just asked him how to use a fax machine. We have God mode root access. Lillian, he chuckled, rolling his eyes. SentinelBot is taking the wheel. Your legacy protocols are being overwritten by our AI as we speak. He dramatically adjusted his cashmere collar, looked down at his designer watch, and gave me my final directive. He told me my services were no longer required and ordered me to clear out my desk and leave the premises before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway back to my private office. My hands were perfectly steady. I did not shed a single tear. I did not harbor a microscopic ounce of resentment. Emotional reactions are for people who do not understand the rules of the game. I sat in my ergonomic chair for the very last time and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a heavy 3-inch thick binder. It was the master copy of our SOC 2 Type 2 Compliance Protocol Manual. I knew every comma and clause inside it because I wrote it. The entire board of directors had formally signed it into absolute corporate law exactly 2 years ago. You have to understand the gravity of what we stored at Etheris. We were not hosting vacation photos or social media posts. We hosted deeply sensitive, federally protected medical records, psychiatric evaluations, terminal cancer diagnoses, genetic sequencing data, and social security numbers. In the eyes of the law, this data is practically radioactive. To ensure this information remains safe from catastrophic breaches, the law requires a specialized security mechanism. In my manual, it was designated as the 90-day master key rotation. Think of the core data vault like a massive bank safe, but instead of steel, it is built out of complex mathematics. Every 90 days, the digital locks on that safe must be completely dismantled and rebuilt to prevent anyone from hacking them. But a machine cannot legally authorize this rotation on its own. The federal guidelines demand absolute human accountability. Therefore, to trigger the 90-day master key rotation, the system demanded a 2-step verification process that could never be automated. First, it required the live biometric fingerprint of the officially registered, legally responsible personnel. For the past 5 years, my fingerprint was the only one authorized by the Federal Registry. Second, it required the insertion of a highly encrypted physical hardware USB token. It was a small, heavy piece of metal, no bigger than my thumb. Without my fingerprint and that specific physical USB drive, the system would automatically assume it was under a hostile cyber attack. Carter Vance made a fatal, irreversible mathematical error by abruptly firing me in front of 50 people, aggressively deleting my administrative network access through his shiny new software, and blatantly refusing to sign the standard 3-page handover protocol. He completely severed the chain of custody. He forcefully removed the only authorized human being from the equation, leaving the system in a state of suspended animation. A lesser employee, an amateur driven by spite, would have slipped that physical USB token into their pocket, taken it home, and used it to extort the company for a massive severance check. That is called corporate espionage. That leads to federal prison. I do not break the law. I weaponize it. I flip the heavy binder open to the section labeled Emergency Protocols. The directive was crystal clear. If the primary security custodian is abruptly terminated without a fully vetted, legally authorized successor standing by to receive the hardware token, that token immediately becomes an unmanaged critical liability. Leaving it in an empty desk drawer or handing it to an unauthorized executive like Carter constitutes a severe federal compliance violation. I pulled a specialized, anti-static bag from my supply cabinet and carefully dropped the heavy metal USB token inside. Next, I printed out a hard copy of the unceremonious termination email Carter had just blasted to my inbox. I grabbed the blank handover document he had arrogantly refused to sign. I slid the anti-static bag and the paperwork into a thick, tamper-evident security envelope. I sealed it tightly, pressing my thumb along the adhesive strip until it locked. I did not leave this package on Carter's desk. I did not leave it with the IT department. Instead, I called an armored, bonded courier service. I addressed the sealed envelope directly to the independent auditing firm that oversaw Ethirus. They were the terrifying third-party watchdogs who reported directly to the government. On the front of the envelope, I attached a rigidly formal, legally binding memorandum. I typed it out with meticulous care. It read, "Primary security custodian terminated by executive order without a legally designated successor. To prevent the immediate risk of a catastrophic data breach, physical control of the encryption hardware token is hereby surrendered to the audit board." I handed the envelope to the armed courier. Exactly 22 minutes later, my phone vibrated. I received a time-stamped, cryptographically signed digital receipt from the auditing firm, confirming they had officially received the hardware token and secured it in their vault. The chain of custody was now legally out of my hands, and vastly beyond the reach of Carter Vance. My duty as a legally compliant citizen was perfectly fulfilled. I neatly packed my personal belongings, a framed photograph, a small potted succulent, and my favorite coffee mug into a single brown cardboard box. I walked down to the main lobby. The receptionist looked at me with wide, sympathetic eyes. I gave her a polite nod, placed my plastic employee access badge on her sleek marble desk, and turned away. I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors and stepped out into the blazing, brilliant Texas afternoon sun. I took a deep breath of the warm air. I was officially unemployed, but I felt incredibly light. Behind me, hidden deep within the flashing servers of the Ethirus data center, I had just planted a flawlessly legal, devastatingly powerful time bomb, and it did not make a single sound. Exactly 14 days after I walked out of those heavy glass doors, Carter Vance transformed the main executive floor of Ethirus into a ridiculous, high-end nightclub. He spared absolutely no expense for his grand revelation. He hired a private gourmet catering company, brought in a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of a server rack, and popped dozens of bottles of ridiculously expensive vintage champagne. He gathered the entire surviving staff to formally announce the earth-shattering financial news he had been aggressively engineering behind closed doors. Ethirus Cloud Solutions was officially preparing to be acquired by the massive global conglomerate Vanguard Horizon Capital. The purchase price was a staggering $358 million. Carter strutted around the room like a victorious emperor returning from a glorious war. He loudly bragged to anyone holding a crystal flute of champagne that his ruthless restructuring was the ultimate masterstroke that sealed the historic deal. He boasted that forcefully eliminating expensive human elements and replacing them with his beloved artificial intelligence had drastically reduced overhead operating costs. According to his deeply flawed logic, terminating my salary and entirely automating the compliance department made the financial spreadsheets look incredibly sleek. He claimed this aggressive maneuver pushed the company valuation to its absolute maximum peak in the eyes of the ruthless Vanguard investors. He soaked in the applause, entirely convinced of his own unparalleled genius. While Carter was upstairs clinking glasses and bathing in the adulation of his subordinates, a radically different scene was quietly unfolding in the subterranean server room directly beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. Down in the freezing, neon-lit basement, his shiny new SentinelBot software was struggling to reconcile the mandatory compliance logs. A small, persistent yellow warning banner began flashing rhythmically on the main centralized control dashboard. The glowing text read, "Missing hardware token authentication." A terrified junior IT technician, completely unwilling to ruin the extravagant celebration upstairs, nervously called his boss away from the party to show him the flashing error code. Carter marched into the server room, clearly annoyed that his victory lap had been interrupted. He barely even glanced at the glowing monitor, lacking even a fundamental, entry-level understanding of federal cryptography requirements. He confidently ordered the frightened technician to simply suppress the digital alert. "It is just a legacy software bug," Carter commanded with an arrogant wave of his manicured hand. "Mute the warning notifications immediately and let the AI do the job I paid for." With a few keystrokes, the junior technician silenced the yellow banner. The screen went dark, but the invisible internal countdown did not stop. On the completely opposite side of Austin, my daily life was blissfully, beautifully quiet. I had taken a small portion of my savings and registered a tiny, independent cybersecurity consulting firm. Instead of agonizing over corporate firewalls and frantic executive emails at 3 o'clock in the morning, I spent my quiet mornings attending advanced vinyasa yoga classes. I mastered the delicate, patient art of making slow, manual pour-over coffee. I traded my stiff, formal business suits for comfortable linen clothes and soft sweaters. My mind was entirely at peace. But I was not completely disconnected from the ruthless corporate machine I had left behind. Every few days, I would casually open the digital calendar application on my mobile phone. I knew the precise, unalterable mathematical rhythm of the Aetherus servers. I knew exactly which day the 90-day master encryption cycle was federally mandated to legally mature. Corporate acquisitions of that monstrous magnitude never happen overnight. They require a grueling, microscopic investigation process known in the industry as due diligence. During this period, the buying company sends in armies of ruthless lawyers and forensic auditors to tear through every single asset, contract, and security protocol before they ever agree to write a massive check. By a truly beautiful, almost poetic stroke of cosmic coincidence, the absolute deadline for the hardware encryption key rotation fell directly in the middle of the final week of Vanguard Horizon Capital's aggressive due diligence period. I sat at my rustic wooden dining table, feeling the warm Texas morning sunlight stream through the large window. I opened my personal laptop and right-clicked on the blank desktop screen. I created a brand new, completely empty digital folder. I carefully typed out the name of the folder, Aetherus Fallout. I hit the Enter key to save it, leaned back in my comfortable chair, smiled warmly at the glowing screen, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my perfectly brewed coffee. The Vanguard Horizon Capital due diligence team did not just walk into the Aetherus headquarters, they invaded it like a corporate tactical unit. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning when the heavy elevator doors slid open in unison on the executive floor. Out stepped a phalanx of terrifyingly sharp corporate attorneys and elite cybersecurity forensic specialists. They wore immaculate dark suits and carried heavy metal briefcases. They were not there to drink coconut milk lattes, admire the expensive modern art, or applaud the ridiculous ice sculptures from the previous celebrations. They were the final executioners. Their sole mission was to conduct one last, grueling, uncompromising penetration test on the digital infrastructure before Vanguard officially signed that monumental $358 million check. The atmosphere inside the main glass-walled conference room immediately grew dense, cold, and suffocating. Carter Vance stood at the head of the long, polished oak table, sweating visibly through his designer cashmere sweater. He plastered on his signature, blindingly white smile, desperately attempting to project an aura of total control. The lead auditor for Vanguard, a tall, utterly humorless woman with cold gray eyes, did not return his smile. She sat down, opened her thick leather binder with a sharp, intimidating snap, and bypassed all pleasantries. She immediately demanded to see the current, legally binding SOC 2 certification. More specifically, she requested the unedited digital logs of the master encryption key rotation for the current financial quarter. Her tone left zero room for negotiation. She made it abundantly clear that Vanguard needed absolute mathematical proof that the highly sensitive medical records of millions of vulnerable patients were still being strictly protected under federal law. Carter chuckled, practically vibrating with unearned, arrogant confidence. He casually adjusted his posture, leaned against the glass table, and signaled to his visibly nervous IT director standing in the corner of the room. Carter proudly announced to the room of silent attorneys that Aetheris had completely evolved past the need for archaic human paperwork and manual compliance. He boasted that his shiny new AI system handled everything with perfect, automated precision. He commanded the IT director to project the primary AI management dashboard onto the massive wall monitors to prove his point. The IT director typed frantically on his keyboard. The giant, high-definition monitors flickered to life. However, instead of displaying the sleek, modern, automated data interface Carter was expecting, the screens went entirely black. The entire room fell dead silent. A single second later, a massive, pulsing, blood-red notification box forcefully hijacked the displays. The blinding crimson light bathed the terrified faces of the Aetheris executives. It was not a standard software error message. It was a digital death sentence. In giant, unyielding capital letters, the core system declared hardware token required. Directly beneath that terrifying mandate, a digital clock was aggressively ticking backward, second by agonizing second. The screen warned 48 hours until automatic system lockdown. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. The trap I had laid had finally sprung shut. Carter stared at the glowing red screen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish pulled from the ocean. He frantically barked at the IT director, commanding him to use their administrative root access to manually override the warning. The IT director violently slammed his fingers against the keyboard, his face rapidly draining of all color. He whispered in a trembling, cracked voice that the digital override was physically impossible. This was the catastrophic twist Carter had entirely failed to anticipate. When he used his automated software to forcefully and abruptly delete my administrative access 2 weeks prior, the foundational security architecture did not recognize it as a standard corporate restructuring. The deep-level system interpreted the sudden, brute-force digital decapitation of its legally authorized custodian as a highly sophisticated internal cyber attack. The system did exactly what I engineered it to do when under siege. It instantly severed all digital remote access. It completely rejected the artificial intelligence. It built an impenetrable mathematical wall around the medical data and demanded the physical encrypted hardware key to prove the environment was genuinely secure. The lead Vanguard attorney slowly closed her binder. The temperature in the room plummeted. She stared directly at Carter, her voice slicing through the heavy, panicked silence like a surgical scalpel. "Who currently holds the physical hardware token?" "Mr. Vance," she asked coldly. "And exactly who is the authorized human being possessing the legal authority to sign the compliance verification right now?" Carter stammered, his confident facade shattering into a million pieces. Entirely paralyzed by sudden terror, he looked desperately at his IT director for salvation. The technician swallowed hard, cold sweat pouring down his forehead. He practically choked on his own words as he delivered the final, fatal blow to his boss. He reported that the foundational cryptography system still exclusively recognized one single human entity. Lillian Howard was the only name permanently burned into the legal registry. Furthermore, the IT department had absolutely zero record of where the physical USB drive was located, and the system would absolutely refuse to accept any other command until it was inserted. Pure, unadulterated panic violently ripped through the flashy executive office. The invisible walls of the room were rapidly closing in. The giant red clock on the wall was relentlessly ticking down, and Carter Vance suddenly realized the horrifying truth. He had willingly locked himself inside a burning building, and he had arrogantly fired the only person holding the key. Carter Vance excused himself from the glass boardroom, his face ashen, and practically sprinted down the hallway to the executive restroom. He slammed the heavy oak door behind him, locking it with a trembling hand. The man who had strutted through the office like a conquering king just an hour prior was now completely unraveling. Sweat poured down his forehead, completely ruining his perfectly styled hair and staining the collar of his ridiculously expensive cashmere sweater. He fumbled frantically with his mobile phone, nearly dropping it on the marble floor, as he furiously scrolled through his contact list to find my name. He hit the dial button, pressing the phone so hard against his ear that his knuckles turned stark white. The line rang once, it rang twice. Then, it abruptly cut to the cold, impersonal, automated voice of my generic voicemail greeting. I had not even bothered to record a custom message for that particular phone number. He left a frantic, pathetic, rambling message begging me to call him back immediately, promising massive financial bonuses and instant reinstatement. He sounded like a drowning man bargaining with the ocean. He hung up and dialed again, and again. Every single attempt ended in the exact same cold, automated silence. Realizing that a phone call was entirely useless, Carter stormed out of the restroom and cornered his director of human resources. With wild, desperate eyes, he ordered the terrified executive to drop everything, get into his car, and physically drive to my home address on file. He commanded him to drag me back to the office by any means necessary, offering an open checkbook for whatever ransom I might demand. The human resources director sped across the city of Austin, breaking several traffic laws, only to arrive at my former residential complex. He sprinted up the stairs and aggressively pounded on the door. It was opened by a confused, elderly woman. My former landlord stepped out of the adjacent unit and informed the breathless executive that I had officially broken my lease, packed up all my belongings, and moved out of that apartment over a month ago. Furthermore, I had explicitly left absolutely no forwarding address. I was a complete ghost. When the human resources director called Carter to report this catastrophic failure, Carter violently threw his coffee cup against the wall of his private office, shattering it into tiny pieces. All of his corporate power, his intimidating job title, and his massive salary were utterly useless against a woman who simply did not exist in his world anymore. Back in the main conference room, the merciless digital countdown clock on the wall had relentlessly ticked down to exactly 12 hours. The situation had escalated from a localized emergency into a full-blown corporate apocalypse. The Ethirus board of directors was urgently summoned for a mandatory crisis meeting. These were wealthy, powerful individuals who were already mentally spending their massive payout from the acquisition. Now, they were staring down the barrel of total annihilation. The legal counsel for Ethirus stood up and laid out the horrifying reality of their situation. If that timer hit zero, the entire foundational architecture would automatically execute a hard lockdown. Every single terabyte of highly sensitive medical data would be permanently cryptographically sealed. Ethirus would instantly breach every single service contract with hundreds of major hospitals and healthcare providers across the country. Patients would not be able to access their own life-saving medical histories. The resulting wave of class action lawsuits would instantly bankrupt the company, and the federal government would mercilessly crush them with penalties reaching into the billions of dollars. Desperate to maintain the illusion of control, Carter marched back into the boardroom to face the Vanguard Horizon due diligence team. His white smile was gone, replaced by a sick, yellowish pallor. He stood before the stone-faced corporate attorneys and attempted to spin the most pathetic, transparent lie of his entire career. "This is nothing more than a minor, localized cloud synchronization glitch," Carter lied, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure. "Our automated artificial intelligence is simply running a routine diagnostic check on the legacy servers. My team will have this minor visual error completely resolved in a matter of hours. There is absolutely no risk to the core data or the pending acquisition." The lead attorney for Vanguard Horizon did not even blink. She simply stared at him, recognizing the distinct stench of a terrified, cornered liar. But before she could verbally tear his fragile excuse apart, a synchronized digital chime echoed simultaneously from the laptops and mobile phones of every single person sitting at the massive oak table. It was an urgent, high-priority email, but it did not come from the Etherius internal network. It came directly from the terrifying, uncompromising, independent auditing firm that oversaw the company. The true stroke of genius in my exit strategy was the transparency. The independent auditors did not just send this official notification to the Etherius board of directors. Knowing the absolute severity of the situation, they simultaneously copied the entire legal team of Vanguard Horizon Capital to ensure complete, unalterable transparency. Carter opened the email on his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely read the text. The content of the message struck him like a physical blow to the chest. It was a cold, clinical, and absolutely lethal legal declaration. In accordance with federal compliance regulations, our firm is currently holding the physical encryption hardware token in our secure vault. The email stated clearly, "This action was taken due to a documented, improper termination protocol executed by Etherius management. Our records confirm that Etherius Cloud Solutions has been operating entirely without a legally valid, federally recognized security supervisor for exactly 76 days. Due to the extreme severity of this negligent oversight, we are legally obligated to formally report this critical compliance violation to the Federal Trade Commission immediately." The lie was dead. The cover-up was completely shattered. There was nowhere left for Carter Vance to hide. The very next morning, the brilliant Texas sun illuminated the top-floor glass boardroom, but the atmosphere inside was absolutely freezing. Every single eye in the room was fixed on the massive wall monitors. The red digital countdown clock aggressively ticked its final seconds. 3, 2, 1, 0. A deafening, mechanical alarm echoed through the entire corporate headquarters. Every single computer monitor, laptop, and tablet across the Etherius network simultaneously froze. The screens turned pitch black, immediately replaced by a flashing white text that declared a Level 1 cybersecurity breach. The foundational system had successfully initiated its self-preservation protocol. Every single terabyte of medical data was now cryptographically sealed inside an impenetrable digital vault. The lead auditor for Vanguard Horizon Capital did not gasp. She did not panic. She calmly stood up from her leather chair and sharply snapped her heavy briefcase shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Carter Vance completely lost his mind. He fell to his knees, his expensive cashmere sweater completely drenched in cold sweat. He frantically begged the Vanguard representatives to wait, aggressively pointing his shaking finger at the blank screens. He screamed that Lillian Howard was a disgruntled criminal. He wildly claimed that I had maliciously stolen physical company property, intentionally sabotaged their network, and committed corporate treason. He loudly promised to sue me into oblivion and have me thrown in federal prison by the end of the day. Before Carter could utter another desperate lie, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung wide open. An imposing representative from the independent auditing firm strode confidently into the room. He did not even look at Carter. He walked directly to the center of the massive glass table. With a heavy thud, he placed a transparent tamper-evident security envelope on the polished surface. Inside was the heavy metal USB drive. Right next to it, he placed a crisp printed copy of the time-stamped receipt, bearing my legally binding digital signature. The auditor turned his cold gaze downward at the pathetic, kneeling chief operating officer. "Miss Howard did not steal anything, nor did she sabotage your network," the representative announced, his voice dripping with absolute disdain. "She followed 100% of the federal compliance protocols that you yourselves formally established. The only error in this entire building is the monumental greed and astounding ignorance of your chief operating officer." At that exact moment, the lead attorney for Vanguard Horizon Capital reached into her briefcase. She pulled out the pristine, final copy of the $358 million merger agreement. without breaking eye contact with the Aetherius board of directors. She gripped the thick document with both hands and violently tore it completely in half. The historic, life-changing financial deal evaporated into thin air right before their eyes. The board of directors did not hesitate. They fired Carter Vance right there on the spot, instantly stripping him of all his stock options and severing his contracts. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, uniformed economic police officers marched into the Aetherius lobby and escorted a weeping Carter Vance out of the building in handcuffs, formally charging him with the criminal concealment of a medical data violation. Aetherius itself plunged into total chaos, facing immediate bankruptcy from a massive, unstoppable tidal wave of client lawsuits. Meanwhile, I was sitting peacefully in my brand-new, sunlit private office, enjoying a perfectly brewed cup of manual pour-over coffee. My mobile phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, and surprisingly respectful. It was the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Horizon Capital. He did not ask a single question about the burning wreckage of Aetherius. He got straight to the point. "Miss Howard, I recently heard you opened your own independent consulting firm," the billionaire executive said smoothly. "My corporation desperately needs a lead system architect who actually knows how to play strictly by the book. We are prepared to offer you exactly 5 times your previous salary. Are you interested in a conversation?" I gently tapped my index finger against the rim of my ceramic coffee mug. I smiled warmly at the empty room. "Email me the contract," I replied calmly. "But remember one thing, I am the one who writes the rules." Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this incredible journey today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and want to help keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community. Over there, you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to make public on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and stay tuned for our next episode.